Um, I should like to warmly welcome the delegation of the Holy See after a gap of 14 years. Of course, I was not here 14 years ago like Mr. Boswit, but we are very happy indeed to see your delegation, sir. Now, before moving on to the report as such, on a personal note, let me record my appreciation for the excellent work some of the overseas missionaries have accomplished in my part of the world. And on a personal note, the padris and sisters and mothers in the convent schools have taught several generations of Muslim students in Pakistan and in India, um, Hindus and Muslims, who went on to provide the leadership in their respective countries. And the priests at my school, Burn Hall and Mill Hill Fathers, were role models who uh, looked after the children entrusted to their care and strictly avoided any hint of, you know, conversion activity among their wards, and they enjoyed the confidence of the parents. And the result is that 50 years later, we old boys, we reminiscence and remember these missionaries with great fondness and affection. So they played a very important role in winning the hearts and minds of the Muslims with whom they interacted, and I think this is a important factor today. Now, having said that, Mr. Chairman, I turn to the periodic report, and I noticed that the Holy See report has registered objections of principle in paragraphs 1 to 5, to which Mr. Vasquez has made some very valuable clarifications with regard to the practices of the committee. And I'm very happy Mr. Diakonu has just come. So Mr. Diakonu has spoken a lot about this subject, and I hope he will clarify, because I think this is a very fundamental point which your delegation has raised, sir, and I think it needs an appropriate clarification on our part. Um, I should just like to say I agree with Dr. Vasquez's comments. He has meticulously explained our position, and I won't repeat it. Suffice it just to say that our general recommendations clarify different articles of the convention without in any way distorting the convention. They are in keeping with the convention and are meant to assist state parties. The convention, after all, is a living document which was drafted more than half a century ago. And at that time, the focus, as we all know, was on the eradication of apartheid and the end of racist rule in southern Africa. This was one of the major preoccupations of the international community. And now, having achieved that very laudable objection, the international community now has to shift its focus to the emerging problems which are before all of us, and we have these problems. We face these problems in a very dramatic and graphic way today. I support Madam Crickley's comments about the need to revisit, on your part, revisit the Durban Declaration and Program of Action. One can support Durban without agreeing to the entire text. It represents the state of knowledge on the entire spectrum of human rights, but with special emphasis on discrimination. And it's a most useful reference document and extremely well drafted. So it should not be dismissed out of hand. When we ask you to implement it, of course, it's a recommendation. It's not something mandatory, but it is something highly desirable, if I may say. Similarly, the concept of intersectionality, although not mentioned in the convention, is highly relevant. For example, women's rights become an issue for this committee when one realizes that minority women are especially vulnerable to racial discrimination. So we have this intersectionality, irrespective of the fact that CEDAW, a separate treaty body, has been established to look after women's rights. But our committee would be feeling in its responsibility if we find intersectionality. And same, now there are 10 treaty bodies now. I just give one more example, and that is on disappearances. So sometimes the majority individuals may disappear, but other times it's the minorities who are struggling for their rights and the indigenous people who may disappear. And so we have this intersectionality operational. Now, I have a question, and this concerns intersectionality of race and religion. When I joined the committee about 8 years ago, um, there was not such a strong emphasis on intersectionality of race and religion, but I have noticed in the committee's report since I joined, and in recent years, this has become quite more frequent because we see evidence of this phenomenon in different parts of the world. So I should like to ask the Holy See representatives, what is their position on the intersectionality of race and religion? And I say this because you have people of a different race and they may be discriminated against, and but the focus may be more on their religion, and so it becomes a complex issue of some it becomes a racial discrimination based on religion. And I find that internationally, and all the documents I've been consulting and including newspapers, there is a growing recognition of this intersectionality. So I should be very grateful if you could, if you have a position on this, or have you thought about it? What is your position? I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank you, Mr. Kamal, for your statement. Mr. Lundgren, you have the floor. Mr. Diakono will be next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, of course, I would like to express my appreciation to the delegation of the Holy See for the presentation that they made today and for the report that came back 14 years after the previous one. I was not here when the former one was presented because I became a member the following year when it was presented. But I was glad to see in the, how do you call it, summary records, that at that time, everything that we said in this committee was allowed, was open, and nobody considered that some of our consideration should be closed to the public. So everything, even the approval of each recommendation, was open. There was no censorship against what was said in this committee. Maybe my colleagues will understand better why I'm saying this than the delegation itself. I just wanted to mention that even though I agree with the rapporteur, with Mr. Bossoit, and my other colleagues, that the report does not need to insist so much on extending the concepts that well are, let us say, regulated by the convention. Sometimes I have the feeling that in some aspects our tendency is to go a little or far beyond the scope of our convention. Mr. Madam Quickly referred to gender, that's okay. Mr. Kemal referred to these interconnections between, or possible interconnections between race and religion. If we put it like this, it doesn't make any sense, but in our discussions, we know that it can have some sense in depending on the circumstances that we are discussing. I say this just to stress an impression that I had from the very beginning, and which was, let us say, strengthened somehow by the excellent presentation today by the rapporteur, Mr. Vasquez. A very technical presentation, difficult even for me to comment upon. But what I feel is that everything stems from the very thin difference that exists between or among the Holy See, the Vatican City, and the Catholic Church. It's very difficult, even though you explain what the Vatican City is in paragraph 16, as was mentioned by Mr. Bossoit. I still don't grab correctly what it means in terms of difference when we are speaking about the report of the Holy See. Because after all, your report, which is beautiful, beautiful report, is full of quotations of the popes and of popes as heads of the Catholic Church. So it's difficult for me to really understand if you are presenting the views of the Catholic Church or of the Holy See stricto sensu. Still, taking into consideration these obvious linkages that exist between the Holy See and the Catholic Church, I must stress that for me, what matters in your report above all, much more than gaps that we could point in terms of, let us say, punishment of some cases, or let us say, difficulties that we know that happened and problems that existed and for which Pope Francis has even asked for pardon of the faithful in the history of the church. For me, one has to stress the moral aspect of your report. After all, if the thinness of difference between the Holy See and the Catholic Church is so really thin as I see, you are somehow representatives of the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church is the only church that comes before our committee in a humble position to listen to our criticism. So this is something that we have to take into consideration because I don't know of anything similar in any other religion. We have states that come here who have a special religion, but they speak on behalf of their own, not of their religion. You are always speaking on behalf of the Catholic Church. And this, of course, by presenting reports to our committee, and together with the fact that you are also a state, is what enabled you to be a member of the an observer to the United Nations and a member of a state party to our convention, which is very good for us. It brings also moral authority to our convention. And uh, by doing this, of course, you also show a certain, an obvious act of humility, because not only you are able, you are ready and willing to listen to our criticism, but you expose yourselves to the criticism of other entities, NGOs, organizations, and so on. Some of them will present things that make sense. That, criticism to the attitude of the church or even of the popes in the past. Some will, in the history of America, in the history of even Europe in the 20th century. But some others will present some criticism of the misuse that is made of some Catholic church teachings or Catholic, let us say, the protection of the faithful in detriment and discrimination against some other children, even in education and so on. They have sense. They have their sense. They they but it's of course not the case in this report. I don't. It's not something that can be criticized to the Holy See, as far as I understand. But I repeat, for me, this difference is very thin. What I would like to stress, just to close, I'd like just to put one question and to close. The question is very simple. Since everybody criticized something, I also would like to put a question to you that could be seen as a sort of criticism, even though you referred to the different difficulties you have to punish or to put in order some situations that are irregular. I read some time ago, in the height of this refugee crisis, that Poland, for instance, the clergy of Poland was taking a position against the acceptance of refugees in Poland. Isn't there in your canon law or in any kind of law that applies either in the Catholic Church or in the Holy See some form of law, legal norm that will force this clergy to change their position? I understand they have already changed it, but still, I was shocked when I read that the clergy of Poland was so nationalistic as to prefer not to have refugees anymore. Finally, I will just close. I will just thank you once again for your report by remembering that it was a Catholic saint, Paul, that created the idea of universalism and therefore of human rights when in this famous letter that I don't know to whom it was addressed, by saying that there are no more men and women, there are no more Jews, Greeks, and Gentiles. We are all children of God. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lindgren, for those questions. Mr. Diacono, you have the floor to be followed by Mr. Emir.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'd like, firstly, to say that I'm not sure whether I'm going to repeat what's already been said. I apologise for not having been present for the entire proceeding this afternoon, so apologies. I would like to welcome this dialogue here today with the Holy See as a state party to our convention, because in my estimation, the Holy See, through its existence and its doctrine, works and can work along the same lines as our committee and the other human rights treaty bodies with a view to protecting human rights. I won't go into any details because I don't think I need to prove that assertion or substantiate it in any way. I note in the text of the report with a great deal of interest, after paragraph 65, that the activities undertaken by the Holy See have assisted in the domains of education and culture. It undertakes a number of activities with a view to promoting understanding, mutual respect, and with a view to eliminating conflict, to encourage reconciliation where it's necessary. And I think that's a significant contribution which the Holy See and its priests make to respect for and promotion of human rights around the world. So we have a number of activities which we share. We can't always go into the field as the priests of the Holy See do, but we can do our best to promote respect for human rights. That said, I do have some comments and questions. We know that, unfortunately, certain Catholic priests in certain activities around the world are involved in criminal activities. They violate the laws of the countries in which they find themselves, and they are human beings as well. We have to understand that all human beings can fall into the path of error. What I'm interested to know is to what extent the Holy See encourages the punishment of such priests in line with the laws of the countries in which the crimes in question are perpetrated. We know that we have canon law and complementary law. We have Italian law, and Italian courts can hear certain cases in Rome when events take place and acts are carried out not only by priests but also by other human beings who fall under the jurisdiction of the Vatican State. Italian laws and Italian judges then work on behalf of the Holy See in certain cases. The Holy See is responsible for the activity then of those Italian courts to an extent and for the application of those Italian laws. My question in light of all of this is whether the Holy See ensures that Italian laws are always in conformity with our convention. Does it ensure that Italian judges don't make mistakes in applying those laws, and whether there are no acts of discrimination as part of their activities? Mr. Kamal has to some extent invited me to refer to the consideration which you have in your report under 3D and 5B relating to general recommendations from this committee. As you know, our committee's general recommendations tend to be ones which look at the position of vulnerable groups in society. Indigenous peoples, Roma, non-citizens, women. So I don't see why our committee shouldn't look to the implementation of the convention with particular reference to those vulnerable groups. I forgot to mention people of African descent and those who are discriminated against based on their descent, so descent-based discrimination. Our convention applies to those groups and they need protection because those, above all, are the people who fall victim to discrimination in our society in most countries around the world. So in the committee's recommendations, if you read them, you'll see that we always take our convention as a starting point. We're always seeking to ensure that all the articles of our convention are implemented. Our convention was adopted in 1965. It still bears the mark of colonialism and apartheid. We have to apply it, however, in the 21st century. We have to apply it to realities which exist now. It has to respond to modern realities. And that's why we strive to harness the full potential of all the articles of our convention and use those to ensure that vulnerable groups can be protected. That's the basis of our recommendations, our general recommendations, our concluding observations. And we can prove that they are not in contradiction with our convention. They are recommendations. We have never maintained that they are binding, but they are the means by which we, as a committee, see the various provisions of our convention. And if you look at the opinions of vulnerable groups around the world, you will establish that they all agree. They all refer to our recommendations. They ask for those recommendations to be implemented. I take up your comment in 3D, where you state that this would be a significant change of circumstance under the Treaty of Vienna. That's not the case. That is not the case. We are not witnessing a fundamental change in circumstance. This is a basic aspect of what takes place with states parties in relation to our convention. This is really not the case. I move on to the Durban Declaration now. Our convention is at the origin of that conference and the texts which emerged from it. Some of us were involved in drafting those documents. Mr. Bossuet chaired a committee which prepared the Durban Declaration itself. That was the fruit of a consensus, and I repeat, a consensus. So that's the state of play now. None of this goes against the convention. If we recommend that states adopt plans of action as a means of following the recommendations which appear in the Durban document, it's because we believe that that does not go beyond our mandate. We do not believe that we are going beyond our mandate. So those are my general comments on all of this. You should also bear in mind that many states have adopted plans of action on the basis of the Durban document. They have understood the necessity for such action plans. I don't know whether we can recommend to the HolySee that such a plan of action be adopted. That will depend on the committee's opinions. But we have issued such a recommendation to the vast majority of states, and the majority of states have responded favourably. So they don't see such recommendations as going against our mandate or going beyond our mandate. I'd like to repeat in conclusion that I feel that this dialogue is extremely useful, and I think we're working towards the same goals. Thank you, Mr. Diaconou, for that statement. We will move on now to Mr. Amir, to be followed by Ms. January Bardil. Thank you, Chairman. I would like to welcome this dialogue, which we're currently holding with the Vatican State. As part of our committee's work. I'd like to thank Mr. Vasquez for his objective analysis of the report. However, I have taken the floor because, Chairman, I believe that we have thus far not dealt with something which I believe is crucial. It relates to a pivotal matter and something which may even be more important than our comments about the structural status of how things work in the Vatican, in the Holy See. It's true that the Vatican State is not a classic case of a state, but it is a symbol. And my statement here relates to that symbolism. I don't believe that in psychological and above all moral terms, there is anything more important than the Pope's presence in the world, like many others. I attended the Pope's visit to the United States He's visited other countries, but particularly the United States. And I saw there how he was able to attract a massive crowd. I don't know whether that applies to heads of state who speak about politics. I don't know whether they would be able to attract such a large crowd. There were tens of thousands at that visit. They wanted to see, touch, and listen to the Pope and his moral statements. Which head of state has not visited the Vatican to meet the Pope and to ask for the Pope's advice? The Pope is a moral figure and therefore higher than any political figure or legal figure. But if the Pope is unable to resolve problems with peace, and yet he can gather such massive crowds, who else would be able to achieve that? Who else would be able to bring peace to those who need peace? Justice to those who need justice? We may recall his predecessor at a time when the Soviet Union still existed. At that time, did the Pope's visit to Poland not prove enough to bring new impetus to the Polish people's fight for freedom? That's how he works. A straightforward, humble human being in psychological and moral terms who offers words and actions to whole peoples. Did a previous pope not forgive an assailant who wanted to murder him in the Vatican? He pardoned that person. What moral force leads him to do that? What moral force leads the head of the Catholic Church to demonstrate such mercy? So I believe, Chairman, that we need to move beyond legal concerns we need to examine how the Pope and all those around him are in a situation where when they speak, people listen. There's a sort of light which emanates from the Pope when he travels and meets other human beings. When he travelled in his small vehicle around the United States, did he not demonstrate how humble he is? He travelled around in a small car, and yet he's the Pope, a great man in a small vehicle. There are sometimes massive vehicles, and the men in them aren't quite as great as they think they are. So, Chairman, the Pope, the figure of the Pope, is a significant figure today, a figure which the world likes to see and listen to. We listen to the Pope at Christmas and New Year. We don't hear and listen to other heads of state. So the Pope does give something to the international community. He inspires peace, security, humility. Those are my thoughts, Chairman. That's something which I wanted to add to the contributions of our colleagues and to Mr. Vasquez's brilliant analysis. I just wanted to say a few words about the Pope because that's how I see things personally. Thank you.
A ustedes, señor.
Thank you, Mr. Amir for that contribution. Ms. Genevieve Bardil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to also join my colleagues in welcoming the Holy See to the session of our convention and our examination of reports, and really thank them for having come to speak to us and have this very interesting dialogue. I would also like to thank Mr. Vasquez for his analysis of the situation and the report. And I must say, I would like to agree with everything that he has said in that regard, and Ms. Crickley also for her comments, and all the other colleagues. It's very interesting to read the report from the Holy See in many ways, because you are, in a sense, an anomaly, a state which is different from other states. And I think, interestingly, even though you do not necessarily agree with our concept of intersectionality, it feels as if you also have multiple identities, which is certainly what intersectionality also implies, that you are one person, but you have different identities. In this case, the identity of a state on the one hand, and also the identity of a church, which is huge and very powerful in the world, but also the identity of some territoriality, which is the Vatican City. So, and we understand the structural differences in those three identities in many ways. But I think what's more interesting for many of us is how those structural identities intersect with each other in the way in which you operate in the world. Now, by sheer coincidence, I happen to be that ambassador on page 17 that you mentioned in your report, who went to the Vatican in 2001 to have a very, very interesting conversation with Pope John Paul II when I presented my credentials to him. And we had a very interesting conversation about how the Vatican and the Catholic Church could assist South Africa, which is my country of origin and where I still live, to assist us with programs relating to the implementation of policies relating to HIV and AIDS. Many of our people at the time were suffering from enormous illnesses that resulted out of HIV and AIDS. And the Catholic Church was very, very, as an active member of our society, but also as a member of our society that contributed to the liberation of our struggle. It was an easy conversation to have, and certainly something that led to many improvements in the role of the church in not just education in South Africa, but also in health. So that aspect of your contributions in the report is somewhat missing, because I know for a fact that the Catholic Church has also done a lot in health provision, not just in our country, but elsewhere. So I must confess, I was a little bit surprised about the responses to the Durban conference, but then those have been mentioned, so I will not go back and say, but I would like to encourage you to have another look at the program of action, because in many ways it is also that process that led us to our discussion and our concern on people from indigenous peoples, the indigenous peoples. And Durban certainly brought that group of peoples who up to then were really what I call invisibilized to a large extent. And it is amazing how the power of ordinary people, because in a sense Durban was also about not just states, but also about civil society, and how civil society contributed to us being where we are today. So my two questions are this. First of all, this committee encourages us and states that come to report to engage with their civil societies to address the issue of race and racism in the world. We talk in South Africa about faith-based organizations, and the reason they are important is because they have the power to convene their members. And when their members are convened, they are able to address and support the work that this committee does, but not just to address racial inequality and injustice, but also sexism and other forms of oppression. And the Catholic Church in many of our countries is an important partner in both advocating for racial equality as well as social justice. And so I'd like to encourage you, as the Church and as the Vatican, to use that convening power, as the Pope does, to advocate for promoting and protecting the rights of all peoples, not just from a moral perspective, but also from a perspective of justice and real substantive equality. The second issue that I wanted to discuss or ask is, yes, there are the structural roles and responsibilities of the Holy See, the Vatican State, and the Catholic Church. In other states which are different from this state, there are separations of power between the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. And the legislature has this oversight function that ensures that things get done, including the implementation of the laws, both local and international laws. In the case of the state, the Holy See, who is the oversight person? Who makes sure that certain things get done that are legal? And if there is such a structure within the state, how is it organized, and how does it work? For us, it would be very interesting to understand that. And of course, you don't have to respond right now, but it seems as if all of us need somebody to exercise some oversight over what we do as institutions, or in families, it would be parents, and in schools, it would be teachers and headmistresses and masters. And so I'd just like you to throw more light onto that. And if, of course, if there isn't such an oversight, it would also be an interesting response. And I'd really like to conclude by saying that the report was interesting to read. It didn't necessarily address all the issues that we asked in the last examination. It read very differently from a lot of other reports. And in a sense, I felt also that perhaps the Holy See could have taken the opportunity to not only give us a very, what I would call self-praising kind of response, where everything is fine, everything is hunky-dory, nothing is the matter. Take the opportunity to examine yourself perhaps more critically, and really face some of the challenges that the world has, because there are many challenges, and even the Vatican and the Holy See must struggle with some of them in both implementing our convention, but also struggling for social justice. Because then I think with a very rosy picture, as well as a picture that shows some of the challenges, it will make it more realistic and therefore more useful for not only yourselves, but also for us. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, señora.
Thank you very much, Ms. General Badil. Mr. Vasquez has asked for the floor for a second time, but before I give the floor to him, may I say to you, turning to the delegation, that you will have realized that there's a whole range of questions covering a legal analysis, a philosophical analysis of the situation, but all of these are in connection with the implementation of the convention in your country. So we're both treading the same path. We as Sweden, we as a country that has ratified the convention, and our whole endeavour is fighting for equality for Mr. Vasquez.
Thank you, Chair. I apologize for taking the floor a second time, but I just wanted to take the opportunity, since there is time this afternoon, to mention a few points that are in the list of themes, requests for information that were in the list of themes that haven't been touched upon yet. And I didn't see the information in the initial report of the delegation. And so I just wanted to state that we are still interested in the information if in fact the information is available, and would welcome receiving it tomorrow morning, or being told or being informed that the information simply doesn't exist. A clarification of whether there is information on these points would be appreciated. I'm referring to point theme 2B, information on cases of direct applicability of the convention and cases in which the convention has taken precedence over the law of the Holy See. Point 3A, information on any cases of racial discrimination by lay persons within the Vatican City State or by members of the clergy and how these have been addressed. We have spoken about the criminal law number 8, which was passed July 11th, 2013. And so that may be so recent that there aren't cases actually applying that law. But the request in point 3A is broader and asks for any cases of racial discrimination, whether or not related to law number 8. Also, point 4A and B, information on the number of asylum applications within Vatican City State and the number of persons extradited from Vatican City State, as well as information on the integration of and non-discrimination against non-citizens, particularly migrants, and the measures taken to promote their socioeconomic and cultural rights within Vatican City State. And then finally, points 6A and C regarding training. We did ask, I asked in my initial presentation about training of Catholic educators and administrators of educational institutions, and Mrs. Crickley asked about that as well. But the request in paragraph 6A is broader and asks for information on any measures taken, including regular training to inform members of the clergy, congregations, religious orders, and public officials, including the Swiss Guards and gendarmes, about human rights obligations of the Holy See under the convention. And then 6C is more related to Catholic schools and clerics and seminaries, but information on training with respect to our convention and the obligations of the Holy See under our convention would be appreciated. So I just wanted to make sure that those issues did not fall through the cracks, and I'd be welcome such information, if it exists, on those questions tomorrow morning. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, señor. Thank you very much, Mr. Vasquez. Mr. Murillo Martinez, you have the floor. Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, Mr. Chairman, I would kindly like to ask the delegation of the Holy See if you could give us more information about the encyclicals and the role they play, what they do. And I would also like to avail myself of this opportunity to ask one thing. My name is Pastor, which means pastor, but I'm not a pastor, as in a Protestant pastor, like a priest. Just for you to know, I know that the pastors in the church play a certain role, but I would be not playing that role. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. William Martinez, says the chair. But I must say, you also have a pastor's personality, so it's understandable that people might be confused. So, distinguished delegation from the Holy See, over 75% of the members of the committee have taken the floor this afternoon, and yet you still have time if you wish to take the floor now, or you can wait until tomorrow. This is entirely up to you. as to how you proceed. You can take just 5 minutes if you want to agree and then take the floor. Otherwise, you can proceed differently, but you have the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente. I would first of all like to thank the members of the committee because of the comments are very pertinent, very substantial, and constructive. I find it a way to improve the quality of the dialogue between the delegation and the committee. And I think that the bottom line is that we are moving all in the same direction to try to improve the quality of vulnerable groups, respect the dignity of every person, and to affirm in the difficult circumstances that sometimes we face today between refugees, asylum seekers, victims of violence, victims of abuses, to try to create a better quality of life for our world. I think this is the first lesson that I draw from the exchange of this evening. There are several questions that range from very technical and legal that in a way derive from the intersectionality of the nature of Holy See Catholic Church and Vatican City State. That will need a more nuanced response. And there are some other questions that are more immediate, more technical, like, for example, the case of Haitians in the Dominican Republic that was raised by our pastor present in the committee. And I must say right away that Caritas Dominican Republic is very active in trying to resolve the problem with the Supreme Court of the Dominican Republic and the president himself, who is more sensitive than some other people in the elite government of the Dominican Republic. But anyway, so I would suggest that maybe we prepare a more exhaustive response for tomorrow. And if you, Mr. President, allow it, we can we can do it tomorrow morning.
Muchas gracias, Su Excelencia.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your latest intervention. Tomorrow, I am convinced, we will be very much looking forward to waiting with great expectation to hear what you have to say. So thank you very, very much. This brings us to the end of meeting 2394 of the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. So we meet again tomorrow at 10 a.m. sharp. The meeting is adjourned.